X-Trail is brought to you in part by Amaze. Come in and be amazed. We've got what you need. And Insure. Your life, your health, your Insure.
And hello and welcome to the final program of X Trail. Well, what a night. Mia Moore Motley is definitely a fan of pop artist Miley Cyrus. She came in like a wrecking ball again, a clean sweep of all 30 seats. The election was historic in so many other ways. It saw two women at the top of their political game in terms of running the party. We saw 7 parties including 8, I think, or 9 independents. But now that she's won this overwhelming mandate, let's look back at the campaign for 2022. Our guest, Dr. George Bell, political analyst, Professor Cynthia Barrow-Giles, Professor of Political Science, UWI, and Professor Barrow-Giles, congratulations. Devron Bruce, a political scientist, and Dr. Tennyson Joseph, Senior Lecturer in Political Science at the University of the West Indies. I'm going to give everybody 1 minute to do a quick round robin. Let's look back at campaign 2022. What were the highlights? And please stick to the highlights because I'm coming back for the lowlights. So let's start. Dr. Bell, I'll start with you.
The highlight is the devastating and massive defeat of the Democratic Labour Party once again. That is the highlight.
Okay. Dr. Barrow-Giles? Professor Barrow-Giles?
Yes, thanks. I would have to support Dr. Bell in relation to the highlight. I think this elections was in fact quite extraordinary because in my mind, if there was even a modicum of opportunity and of hope for the Democratic Labour Party, it would have been that they would be able to crawl back the base. They did some of that, but I don't think it was enough. So to me, that was the highlight. And the second thing was, I think, quite frankly, the way in which the DLP managed to shoot themselves in the feet. To me, that's the highlight of this election.
Dr. Joseph?
Yeah, I think there is consensus on what the highlight is. I think for me, the highlight was the uniqueness of the whole situation. It was a new period for all of us observing an early election called in the context of COVID. And the highlight was, to me, the kind of machinations and the discussions around that.
Okay, and Devron, the highlights for you?
And I would generally have to agree with the highlight being the Democratic Barbados Party taking all 30 seats, the inability of the Democratic Party to return its more traditional seats, and we have to now reconsider that term of seats. And certainly one of the other highlights had thus far. So those would be the main to contribute so far.
Can we still say that 2018 was an outlier? Remember, you were on an earlier program, Professor Barrow-Giles, and you said we shouldn't compare any of the previous election results to 2018 because 2018 was an outlier. Is it still an outlier?
Well, I've had last night. I think I had to review what I said perhaps on the earlier program. I still think that 2018, because of the massive swing towards the Barbados Labour Party, was in fact very unusual. When we look at this election, in spite of what I said about the extraordinary victory of the Barbados Labour Party, is also very clear that in the 2022 elections, the Barbados Labour Party was not able to attract the same magnitude of support that it did in 2018. It's also very clear that the Democratic Labour Party clearly failed to do what was its only task this election, and that was to crawl back its base. And so to that extent, I would say yes, 2018 was very significant, and one of the things that we certainly have to focus on going forward is how do you deal with the fact that there's quite a large cross-section of people who people variously describe as swing voters, who are totally disenchanted with the political parties. I mean, these are people who supported the BLP last election, but they certainly did not come out in this election. And you see that in terms of the loss of support, what I call the attrition to the Barbados Labour Party in almost, not everyone, but in almost every single constituency in this country.
Would you say that that's one of the low lights? So let's start looking at the low lights. Is that the low light for you? That the apathy or just the disinterest of the electorate?
That clearly is very important, but I think for me, in terms of this election, there are probably more than just one low light, and I'll just indicate what I think are important. One has to do with the fact that the DLP's sort of momentum, which I think they had some momentum. I'm not saying it was great, but they had some momentum. And I think that momentum sort of fizzled out after the unfortunate statements by the former Prime Minister. That is, of course, Frondell Stewart, with his reference to the glorious period and the very unapologetic nature or comments coming out from some of the members of the Democratic Labour Party who had been on the 2018,
Ticket,
platform. So
yeah.
that for me, yeah, that for me was one of the lowlights. The second, and I think we really need to deal with it. To me, um, the second issue has to do with the management of the elections by the Elections and Boundaries Commission. Even though we understand that the snap election was called, I think they made mistakes, and therefore the fact that so many people were disenfranchised and the categorical statement that was taken very soon after the call of the election I think is clearly very problematic. And for me, as a person who has monitored elections over the last 20 years, I certainly was concerned about the acceptance, very ready acceptance of the Elections and Boundaries Commission, that they had to elevate health concerns over democratic concerns. So that's the second low light for me.
Thank you very much. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we continue to look at the low lights of the 2022 campaign. Stay with us. And if you're watching X-Trail, welcome back to the program. Our guest today, Dr. George Bell, political analyst, Professor Cynthia Barra-Giles, a professor of political science at UWI, Devron Bruce, also political scientist, and Dr. Tennyson Joseph, senior lecturer in political science, UWI. If you've just joined us, you would have missed the top part, first segment of the program, where we talked about the highlights of the 2022 campaign, and then we started looking at the lowlights. So, Professor Cynthia Barra-Giles, she spoke last of the lowlights. Devron, for you, what were the lowlights of the campaign?
Well, I would say the lowlight for me would have to be the lowest voter turnout in Barbadian history. We had what seems to be around 44% initial findings. We'll have to see what the Electoral and Boundaries Commission put out at the very end. But we've had an extremely low turnout. And now you've had a government, in essence, which was elected by a minority of electors in Barbados for the first time in history. So that's definitely a low light. We certainly want a government that would have a full command and can say, in essence, that they have been elected with a real mandate. And that is, I would say, one of the low lights that I've seen thus far. An additional low light would obviously be the nature of the Democrat Labour Party's campaign. It was mentioned before that there were some significant missteps that you would have thought they would have learned from and would have known better about. But I guess they would move on from here on.
Okay, Dr. Tennyson Joseph?
Yeah, before I go straight into my what I thought were the lowlights, I just wanted to say, initial question to Professor Barbados in relation to whether 2018 was an outlier. I would just want to say, in my view, we can see 2022 as a continuation. So, in a sense, there was not anything different. Even the outcome of the election was really a restatement of what we saw in 2018. So, and to me, in that way, that to me was a kind of like a low light to me, because I found it to be a very flat and boring campaign, because almost from the very beginning there was almost like a fait accompli, and I was wondering what messages can the BLP come with on the platform, especially given that there was not much of a challenge in the first place, and they had voluntarily ended the term early. So what new message are you coming with? And also because the DLP was not ready, I also felt that there was an inability to really craft a proper discussion. So it was really a continuation of 2018. I think last night all of us were looking to see whether they would see a slight difference in seats. And of course, that didn't happen. So really, what we have was, I think, we are in very many ways exactly where we were on that day in mid 2018. And I also would agree with Professor Barajad that a low light had to do with was also to do with the fact that we didn't see a creative enough response by the Electoral and Boundaries Commission to the the condition under which the election was being fought. There was a personal low light for me that I was turned away from the polling station because my name was not on the list, and it was kind of it was certainly I was kind of surprised to this paper that Mara Thompson and her daughters, and in speaking to an official from the electoral department, a particular returning officer, I got the notion that, and also to other party officials who were involved in the campaign, I'm hearing some stories that a number of people found themselves not on the list. And one explanation I heard was, I mean, I'm not referring to the numbers who were in COVID isolation, people who were eligible to vote. And one explanation I heard was that perhaps in the printing of the list, there might have been some names dropped off. So that was really the low light to me. And the general combination of all of those things made it feel a bit flat from what I was seeing in the debate and in the period leading up to the election itself.
Names not being on the voters list is definitely very unfortunate, and I hope it is something that the Electoral and Boundaries Commission will look into. Dr. Bell, the lowlights for you.
Yeah, I would like to deal with both the outlier issue and the low light. In relation to being an outlier, that comes from looking at it in two ways. Uh, if you look at it as an event in itself, uh, then you could say because of the extremity of the result that this makes it an outlier. But if you are looking at the decline of the Democratic Labour Party from the death of Mr. Barra and coming right through to the horrible performance in between 2008 and 2018, then it is a progression. It is a progression to an almost a conclusion that says you would have to get rid of that party in relation to governing, in relation to the particular elements that were in charge of it at that time. And that is why the people spoke with such determination. So I don't see that aspect of it when you look at it in that way as it being an outlier. I see it as the culmination of a progression. If you look at it as an event in itself because of its extremity, then you could see it as an outlier. In relation to lowlights, I think that the niggling and persistent problem of the negative use of social media, that is something that globally we haven't been able to resolve properly, and it is not resolved here. And it was a condition of this election campaign as well, although I don't pay much attention to it in terms of its weight. But it necessarily is at least a nuisance, and it could have some negative impact in some cases. And the other thing that would be a low light for me is the manifest demonstrated political immaturity and political naivety of third parties and the people who are leading them in relation to political activity in Barbados. It's not that a third party in itself has to be immature and naive. It is that the particular set of third parties that we have right now are led by a level almost disgraceful of political immaturity and naivety.
Thank you, Dr. Bell. And political third parties are a conversation in and of themselves. One of the things I want to look at is campaign language, because we saw in 2018 some of the language that was used on the campaign trail by the Democratic Labour Party really was not acceptable. And I'm not saying that the BLP didn't as well, but there was particular notice of the language used by the DLP. Come back to 2022, and now we're seeing some of that language again. But the electorate now seems to be more sensitive to that kind of language, and therefore not as, don't find it funny, don't find it cute, don't find it part of the campaign culture. So is language on the campaign trail changing because the electorate and the age range of the electorate is changing, and therefore the things that would have been funny even in 2018 are not funny in 2022? I'm going to start with you, Deborah.
Well, interestingly enough, I think there was less of the reference you made towards bad language and just the type of campaign in 2022. There were some instances of it occurring, but I don't think that the response in 2022 was any more serious than it was in 2020, 2018 rather. I think 2018 was definitely far more prominent when it came to the outrage and the response towards those type of comments. Now, as it relates to the change in the demographic, yes, there's definitely a change in the demographic and a more, I would say, sensitive. You use the word sensitive demographic towards certain types of language and certain types of inferences. But again, there are many audiences in politics, and that type of behavior still works with some audiences. The difference is now that you live in a social media age where you say these things, it will follow you. And individuals who would not be following you would end up saying, and it can certainly be used against you. So I think what has changed is yes, the sensitivity of a certain demographic, but it's really the onset of social media and its ability to really be used against you in those instances. But I'm not completely convinced that this society has moved on from certain types of politics. Maybe certain age groups have, but it seems perfectly, I would say, almost acceptable for other age groups and another demographic.
In for between both parties, did you see a clear sense of one party that had run several successful campaigns and was now led by someone who themselves had come up through the ranks, so to speak, of politics, as against Mr. Peace's campaign, which I sense, and I could be wrong here, I stand to correction. I don't know that she's been come through the ranks of the party in the way that Mia Motley has. So I saw some political missteps that for me, and I'm just a broadcaster, I felt I wasn't sure why those positions or steps had been taken, and I felt that it was almost like inexperience that I was seeing. I'm going to come back to you, Professor Barbados.
Yeah. Yes. Thanks. I think one of the issues, and what are you referring to, you are referring to, is the issue of leadership. And I don't think anybody in this panel going to disagree that, in fact, leadership does matter. And one of the things we saw in the 2022 campaign is that you had the issue of persons wishing to see a very unified, very defined leadership. So that whereas for the most part, I think you saw that in relation to the Barbados Labour Party, because there were these rumors, circulating, unsubstantiated, unverified rumors. In relation to the Democratic Labour Party, those things were always out there. And so that, for instance, last night, in terms of the commentary we heard from many of the commentators, they were concerned that in terms of the platform, that even the candidates themselves would routinely not, in fact, recognize Verla, very unfortunately, as the leader. She may be the president, but not the leader. And so one of the things I thought was that missing from the campaign on the camp of the Democratic Labour Party was that there was not a recognition, I think, on the part, or what I call, there's some kind of selective perception on the part of the Democratic Labour Party. And that selective perception led them to a situation where, missing from their strategy, understanding very well that Vola, for a variety of reasons, was unpopular, both internally and externally. They did not attempt to come together, I think, in the way that they, in fact, should have. And
Well,
for me,
shouldn't
that
she
was
have
very
had to
few.
seize that opportunity? Because I saw a clip on the news where she said that people are saying that because her posters are not up on every poll, that she's not the leader, whereas she's saying, but her poster doesn't have to be up, and everything is not about her. And I'm praising what she said, because her candidates can stand on their own. But a lot of them were new, so how were they going to stand
Yeah,
on their
yeah.
own? They needed her to bring her gravitas to the table in order, almost like a mother hen, to bring them under her wing. Coming back to you, Professor Bargels, and then I want to hear Dr. Bell on this one.
Yeah, but the point is that she's not in a position to do so. Don't forget that Vola had not won an election. Vola was fighting for her very political life. So a lot of what Vola had to do was about really trying to win that seat in St. Lucie. And unfortunately, one of the things the Democratic Labour Party also did not do, and in that sense, they failed Vola, was to put the necessary resources and I think boots on the ground so that she could have had a reasonable chance of winning that constituency. So the DLP, remember, and this is one of the unfortunate things, the DLP had no parliamentary presence. Vola is not in parliament. She could not therefore be traveling, North America, the US, and so forth and the other. That thing would have given us sort of a political clout, political resources that Mia Motley has in abundance. And so it was very difficult, especially given what I saw as the internal struggle in the party. That was clear to the very end. It was therefore very difficult for Vola to do so. So that from the very outset, the party was handicapped by this. And unfortunately, from where I sit, it would seem to me that one of the lessons this party has to take out from this 2022 campaign and election results is that some people in that party and some people who were candidates and some people were also members of the political party and publicly professed members of that political party simply selfishly elevated their self-interest above the party interest. And the Democratic Labour Party, by the way, is notorious for doing so. And they shot themselves in the feet.
Okay, thank you very much. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, Dr. Bell, I'll be coming back to you on this one. Stay with us.
X-Trail is brought to you in part by Amaze. Come in and be amazed. We've got what you need. And Insure. Your life, your health, your insure.
And we're back. You're watching X-Trail. Just before we went to break, we were looking at the experience or inexperience of the leaders of both parties, and we spoke to Professor Barbados. I'm going to come back to you now, Dr. Bell, for you to answer that question. Did we see inexperience in Verla de Pisa because she has not sat, and once again, I'm speaking under correction, at certain levels of the party, so she's not risen through the ranks in the same way that Mia Motley has, and therefore there were some fairly obvious missteps made?
Well, that is a fact, but at the same time, do not think that one person uh, makes the decisions on these strategies and so on. So there would have been people around Verla de Pisa advising her as to what to do. And that is going to come back to a cultural question in relation to the Democratic Labour Party. But she had one of the most skilled and experienced people close to her as a family member, uh, Philip Graves. Sir Philip Graves. He is her uncle, and I have no doubt at all that he was giving her advice on a number of things. I think that then there are problems in relation to herself as a leader, and her choice of methodology relates to weak leadership. Um, you would see that if you compare her with Frondell Stewart's statements as a prime minister, that comment that you referred to about her asking everybody that everybody should take care of themselves, and she doesn't have to be helping everybody and so on. That is the attitude that Frondell Stewart had as well. And it had nothing to do with the fact that you should not lead by paying an interest in all your people. It had to do with the fact that he was not particularly respected by most of the people, and therefore he withdrew. And I think in Miss De Pisa, she was seeking respect. I don't think she was disrespected to the extent that Frondell, or dismissed in the way that Frondell was by some of his colleagues. But I think that in her case, that some of them would have seen her as junior to themselves, and therefore where is she coming from? And she had to build that. She would have to build that, and fairly rapidly too, in terms of her maturity as a leader. And she did not succeed in doing that, and she's partly responsible because of what I've just said, and also because of the culture of the Democratic Labour Party. So the weak leadership thing would have inhibited her, but the other thing was that the Democratic Labour Party culturally has not yet escaped from this view that it is the natural majority party of Barbados. And that was achieved in the 60s when the Federation collapsed and Grantley Adams lost his leadership in Barbados by going to the Federation as Prime Minister. And when he had returned, Mr. Barr had taken over. And Mr. Barr was then able to project to national leadership, and he was able to seize the nationalist leadership of Barbados and to say that the Barbados Labour Party was not nationalist in terms of that intent. Now, Owen Arthur recovered that in the 90s. And when he recovered that after crisis, the Sandyford crisis in the Democratic Labour Party. The Democratic Labour Party did not recover from, did not see the new reality and say, we are not that natural majority, we have to repair ourselves and build out again. And they started to look in on themselves, almost like a church. If you are not a member of the Democratic Labour Party, they don't listen to you. And if they don't listen to you, they're not going to learn from their errors, because very often they believe their own propaganda. So that there they are repeating the same mistakes all the time. And when people even guide them from an objective position, they're going to say, oh, that person is not objective because they're not a member of our party. So we're not listening to them. And they then make those horrible missteps because of that. They need to really escape that culture of seeing themselves as complete. That is why in the campaigns very often they have these town meetings that are just around themselves, and they make decisions just around themselves, and they don't reach out to anybody else because they feel if you are not a them, then we don't want to hear you. And that is part of their problem. They can't lead themselves properly in that way, and consequently they can't lead Barbados in that way.
Dr. Joseph, what's the future now for Verla Pepita? She's run in 3 general elections, not run a seat, taken her party into another 30 love clean sweep. What's the future for her? Does she still have a future in politics?
Well, I was listening last night to hear her announce her resignation. I don't think that there was any question about her continuation. I think it was clear. I mean, and she has tried before and she has not won. And last night, as Mr. Barbados said, that was the main objective was to get somebody in the parliament, and I guess in their case, preferably her, around which the party could claim some semblance of recovery. But it didn't happen. So this talk about waiting to hear what the party decides and so forth. It should be immediate. I also want to suggest, though, in the larger discussion about leadership, remember she's facing a terrible handicap. I don't think we should be
Yeah.
underestimating the leadership qualities of Mia Motley. I think sometimes we take those things for granted. But leadership is actually, I'm sorry, I always apologize for saying so. I kind of buy into Plato's argument about leadership. It is a rare thing. You can't teach it in a classroom, no matter how much our friends in management try to do it. You cannot teach that in the classroom. Now, when you see what you have in Mia Motley, it is an organic thing. So anybody in the Democratic Labour Party that was contesting, and particularly Ms. Bola Pisa, was starting at a terrible, terrible handicap. So the future to be for her, and not just her. I think a number of the candidates who run last night, especially those who were the continued losers from 2018. I think the jury is the decision has been made for them, and many of them should probably declare the lack of the decision not to contest again. I think I'm thinking about some of the key stalwarts who did not run and who stayed away, who kept quiet for the last 3.5 years, whether or not they might benefit from not having put themselves back in and would have waited for a later opportunity. But I still feel, in a deep sense, the DLP is exactly where it was in 2018, and perhaps in an even worse situation, because it's now dragging on for longer. If you understand what I'm trying to say. So that is clear. I don't. They can't. There's no rebuilding the party around Bola Pisa. But you could just free the party from that whole notion of sitting down in a meeting and coming out. She has to make the decision that she should offer her resignation and let the party engage in its own recovery. Other persons might emerge.
Devon, are we seeing any people rising that we think are going to rise to the top, or who seem to have the kind of qualities necessary to lead the party? I'm hearing a lot of good things about Ronnie Yearwood. I'm hearing good things about maybe Ryan Walters. Any of those are we think are going to fill that void, or do you think one of the old guard is going to come back, at least for now, to try to build the party back over the next 5-year period?
Well, just for some clarity on what Dr. Joseph said, I don't think Verla is in a position to immediately resign. I think, given the constitution of the party, she is the president until next August or August 2023. So, what she would have to do is convene a special meeting for a new elected president of the party. So, her immediate resignation can't actually work. She has to put things in place to ensure there's a step and a process to follow. Now, directly to your question, regarding the upcoming leadership of the party, I too have been hearing good things about Ronnie Yearwood, and I think that he has many of the qualities that are necessary. We see that he's a good campaigner. He was one of the best performing candidates in the election yesterday. He is a right age group, I would say, and certainly I think he has the ability to bring several different aspects and new aspects to the party. Dr. Bell spoke towards the fact that, in essence, the Democrat Labour Party looks in itself, and that becomes very problematic. It doesn't look upward, and I think Ronnie Year would very well be able to look upward philosophically, look upward policy-wise, and look upward as it relates to just the individuals that would be attracted to a candidacy like his and a presidency like his and a political leadership like his. There's also individuals that Ryan Walters, as you mentioned. But had you given me the opportunity to determine who the individual should be, I would likely say with Ronnie Yearwood in a circumstance like that. Regarding the old guard coming back and holding the party until, I think that would be a dramatic mistake, because that's exactly what happened in 2018. Verla represented part of that old guard movement and just the philosophical grounding and thinking of the old guard in many ways. So I think the party has to make a fundamental break and recognize that where it found itself in 2018, where it was unsure of the result. That the idea that some of these candidates still has some political longevity and political value, and the party heading still in that direction, it is definitive now that, quite frankly, that cannot be the case going forward. So you will need someone absolutely fresh, absolutely new, and really break ties with anything that has happened before.
Okay, thank you very much, Devron. We're going to take another break, and when we come back, we look at what is next for the Barbados Labour Party with this overwhelming mandate, and what are some of the issues that they will tackle first. Stay with us.
X-Trail is brought to you in part by Amaze. Come in and be amazed. We've got what you need. And Insure. Your life, your health, your insure.
And we're back, and we're looking forward now. The swearing-in of the Prime Minister and the Attorney General was held earlier this morning at State House. So what's next for the Barbados Labour Party? I heard the Prime Minister made an interesting statement where she said in some instances she will have to be the people's opposition. So I know that's going to raise a lot of talk. But what's next? What's the next steps now over these next first few days? And I notice that everybody likes to measure themselves in the first 100 days that she's going to have to do to allay some of the fears of Barbadians that once again we don't have an opposition. I'm going to start with you, Professor Barajels, because I know you're going to have to leave us soon.
Yes. Since you couch it in the context of fear, I know there's a lot of issues to discuss, but since you couch it in the context of fear, of a lack of opposition, and we are at the point where if we are to accept what the Prime Minister said, and I have no doubt she was genuine about it, that throughout 2022 and 2023, we are going to have, very broad discussions on constitutional reform. I think if the Prime Minister is genuinely concerned about this, and as I said, I don't question that. I don't question that at all. That we are going to look very seriously at some of the ways in which we can really enhance democratic governance. I know, of course, there's the Thorn Commission on local governance, and hopefully what we'll see is some greater attention being paid, not only to the structures of local governance, but the way in which people are actually participating in those structures, the way in which government is able, in fact, to bring some services to that level. So, of course, I'm looking forward to some of those debates which will be coming on. those that are being, of course, initiated by the government and not initiated by people outside of the government. But I also want to say that the 30-0 results that we saw last night, and I really have to get that out because I have to leave shortly. Because the 30-0 result that we saw last night should not, in fact, blind the people who won the election, the Barbados Labour Party, that they have sustained what I call some heavy bleeding. They did bleed last night. And that bleeding, I think Devron made reference to it, is reflected in the visible tumble in the level of support across a substantial number of the constituencies in Barbados. So it seemed to me, just as the Democratic Labour Party has to engage in some reflection, if you are serious about issues of justice and good governance, etc., if you are serious about representing the people, you certainly have to come to terms with why it is that there, in a matter of 3.5 years, so many thousands of Barbadians have shown that they were not satisfied with the administration of the Barbados Labour Party. I know some people will reject that because last night I heard what I thought was a nonsensical comment from someone that in fact the lower voter turnout reflected in relation to the number of votes that individual members of the Barbados Labour Party got is a reflection of COVID. I'm not saying we should dismiss COVID, but COVID is not responsible for the thousands of voters who decided to stay home. Those swing voters, those people who voted for the Barbados Labour Party the last time, they did not vote for the Barbados Labour Party this time. The Barbados Labour Party was able to hold on to its base. The Democratic Labour Party was able to make a little headway in relation to getting some people. But you have a whole range of people in Barbados who simply decided to stay home. And we have to get to the root of why it is that there are so many people who are disillusioned, even while this government is able to, achieve this remarkable victory in 2022. So these are serious issues that we must address.
Thank you for that. Professor Bell should be looking at, Professor Barbados talked about different types of democracy. Should we start to look now at proportional representation? I know there has been some talk of that in different circles, Dr. Bell.
I don't want to jump into that immediately because if you do that, you're going to have to discuss all kinds of things about stability in the first past the post system and instability in proportional representation and so on and so forth. So that is a big discussion in itself. And I really think that the question that you posed originally is one that we should focus on in relation to where is the Barbados Labour Party, what is next for the Barbados Labour Party. The Barbados Labour Party did set out in its manifesto a vision for a new society. And it was a vision that is of significance because it was attempting to integrate both the governance issue, the issues of blue economy and green economy, climate change, and energy, and the question of what this would do for society and particularly young people. And that is exactly what you need to do for the 21st century. The question mark that came up in one's head in relation to that was the immensity of the proposal and whether they had the resources, the personnel, and the time to implement. So that really and truly, the thing that I would have added to what they did not develop sufficiently, in my view, in the manifesto was the question of a return, a revisiting of political union in the Caribbean. It is 60 years now that we have the Federation collapsed, and we are just plodding along with CARICOM and CSME and that kind of thing. And in truth and in fact, a lot of the developmental issues in the Caribbean would have serious answers in closer regional integration and regional integration at the level of politics. And the young people have to think of that because that is the society that they're going to have to aim for. And I think that we have to make it, therefore, from that program, that vision that the BLP had in its manifesto, they should reach out now to islands and territories in the Caribbean, telling the young people of those islands to reach out to each other. And on that basis, build a platform that the politicians can then stand on. Because I don't buy this thing about that a lot of the politicians are not willing. I saw three outstanding politicians fighting for unity in the Caribbean in PJ Patterson, Wayne Arthur, and Patrick Manning. And it is when they go home that insularity and and island prejudice and all that kind of thing overwhelms them to a great extent. And that is why sometimes the integration falls down. And we try to blame those politicians sometimes too much. So there are other politicians that are weaker in relation to that. And we saw that when those three went, the whole energy in the integration process declined. I think that somebody, and Miss Motley is well placed, because I heard people all over the Caribbean now saying that she should be Prime Minister of the Caribbean. That she has to be able to say, let us carry let us inspire the youth of the Caribbean to come together and give the politicians a platform on which to stand, build institutions across the territories, and on that basis, you bring life back into the politics, into Caribbean politics. I've been told all the time, when you would go in Queen's Park and hear Bustamante talking, or Norman Manley would be visiting here, or Bradley Adams would be visiting in Jamaica. Where is that now? What does this generation do? So we have to get back to that to help to actually implement that vision, and that is what I think is so promising in the Barbados Labour Party. The negative there is really that it is so big a vision that I don't see one little island like Barbados being able to carry through, or one little administration like the Barbados Labour Party administration. But it is very good that they have put it there, and that I hope that a lot of the next few, I don't think they're going to do any 100 days thing anymore. They had the 100 days thing before COVID. What they have to do now is to get to work to see how to make that vision practical. I think that is what they would need to do. The question of governance and the question that you raised, and I said it, I don't think we should go into that quite in detail right now, although I could. When you start picking the Constitution apart, I am convinced that then we are going to see what we are dealing with. The Westminster Constitution is a sophisticated constitution. And if you start thinking that you can just pick here and pick there and all that, and that is not going to have serious cascading implications for governance, in other words, throwing yourself into an unnecessary governmental crisis, we will be not really discerning the realities of the situation.
Thank you for that, Dr. Bell. Devon, I'm going to come to you. Your thoughts on what are some of the things that the Mia Motley-led administration should be focused on as they now take up this mandate?
Julie asked about proportional representation, and Dr. Bell, in essence, said that tampering the Constitution can have significant governmental implications. I think that we've already reached that point, because the political reality is that we've seen now for the first time that it can occur where thousands of Barbadians can vote for a political party and have no representation. That is a crisis of democracy, and that is a crisis of governance. So I don't know what else we need to see to ensure or recognize that changes have to be made to the Constitution to reflect that political reality. And you mentioned proportional representation. Something that I have proposed before would be the creation of national seats in the lower house, for instance, through proportional representation. And that, in essence, does not create a situation where there's any major political changes or major constitutional changes, just an additional of 10 seats in the lower house just through proportional representation. And you wouldn't find yourself in a circumstance where a political party, thousands of persons voting for them, but they don't have any representation in government. So that is a crisis in itself, democratically and governance-wise. Regarding the administration going forward, certainly the economy will be the first thing, second thing, and third thing on its agenda, and should be on its agenda, because I think that is where the apathy really fell and came from regarding the last election. There are many persons who, in essence, felt as though the economy was not working in their best interest. And I feel that we can say this 10, 20, 30 years ago, but the reality is that we're now seeing it reflected in the way people vote. And certainly we would need to get Barbados back on track regarding growth, regarding unemployment, regarding investments and various things to just get Barbados and that vision that the Barbados Labour Party speaks about, getting it into practice. So I think their first, second, third, fourth, and fifth priority has to be getting the economy back into shape.
Okay, thank you very much, Devon. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, more on X-Trail. Stay with us.
X-Trail is brought to you in part by Amaze. Come in and be amazed. We've got what you need. And Insure. Your life, your health, your insure.
And for the last time, we come to the People Say, the segment of the program where we take comments and questions from our audience and throw them out to the panel to get their reaction. So we're going to start with the first one. I'm wondering if the Dems should have acknowledged the mistakes of 2008 to 2018 and let we, the public, know that they are a new crew with a different course, if that wouldn't have caused a different outcome. I'm going to start with you, Dr. Joseph. Do you think that if the party had acknowledged that they'd sinned and fallen short of the glory and sought forgiveness, that the outcome would have been a little different?
Yeah, and well, I think it goes even deeper to the whole question of the reorganization of the DLP. One of the things that struck me following the defeat in 2018 was that there was complete silence. So nobody actually has actually come and discussed in a kind of open and public way about even a change in outlook. I think of something like the free education question. And I've always been arguing that one of the big weaknesses of the DLP, and I think Dr. Bell was alluding to it earlier, is that they've lost the social democratic ground that has been lost to them, and they have been unable to craft a response either to surpass or to match an updated version of social democracy for the time. So you have a policy like the free education system that was removed, and you're coming back to run an election in 2022 and not a word on what is your view on that. In other words, you have to acknowledge you might have made a mistake. You might have to state out publicly what the new policy is, what the new direction is. It goes to a broader question about how do you craft a social democratic vision for the 21st century, and they have not been able to do that. So part of not of being unable to do that is to go back to your past, examine what you represented, what the new global economy is like, the local political economy is like, and how you fit yourself. So even someone, let's take something like republicanism. The Party of Independence is unable to craft a kind of a sound position on that. So what you're hearing in the platform, a little noises about lack of consultation. You're not even sure if they are for republicanism, if they hate the idea, they think it's nonsense. But a lot of what you're getting out of them is to suggest that they don't support it. So these are the kinds of things I think that go much larger than just acknowledging errors between 2008 and 18, but a kind of broader sense of why we failed. In other words, why did the DLP fail between 2008 and 2018? What were the major policy failures? My view is that they were governing in a global economic crisis, and they responded to they used neoliberal responses only. They abandoned social democracy. They were getting rid of education. They were talking about entitlements that have to go. They were talking about introducing user fees and so forth. They were saying there are certain things that cannot be done. You cannot clear the streets of garbage. You cannot spend money on roads. You cannot spend money on schools. And that was what defined the governance between 2008 2018. So the question had to be asked, what is different about now that you were going to do? What has changed between then and now? So I agree that those discussions have not been had, and they were not had, and they are still yet to be had, and they need to be had for the country to move forward.
Professor Barbados, I almost feel like we need a Truth and Reconciliation Commission in order to get past this place that Barbadians are. And for me, I think not enough time has passed. It's only been 3.5 years. And when I see some of the faces that came back who've now been met with a resounding ousting by the public of Barbados, by the electorate, I almost feel like we need a Truth and Reconciliation Commission so that we can just vent, get it out of our systems, and move forward. Your thoughts?
Well, that may well be the case, but I want to respond to the original question, which I think Tennyson, Dr. Joseph actually provided us somewhat of a comprehensive discussion of. However, I want to go back to where we started, and that is to say that one of the things for me in this election was the credibility issue, and Democratic Labour Party lacked that credibility. And they kept on digging a hole for themselves because it seemed to me that they refused, very stubbornly, refused to acknowledge that the Barbadian electorate had in fact rejected them, and rejected them resoundingly for not only their performance, but also for the promises which they made in that 2018 manifesto. And that a lot of not a lot, but you have a few of the candidates, particularly those from the old guard who returned, who simply seem to be operating on what I called before the selective perception. And that selective perception said to them that what they did between 2013 and 2018 in particular was fine, and therefore they had nothing to apologize for. I think we need to confront that. But as I indicated a while ago, and I'm not sure that that people understood what I was saying, I said a while ago that one of the key things for me is that the 2022 elections is extremely important because of that huge decline, that absenteeism which we saw in the vote, and that in the turnout. And that absenteeism suggests to me that there are a lot of people who are not just apathetic, there are a lot of people who are disillusioned. So I am making a distinction between the apathy and the
And the
disillusion.
disillusionment.
And precisely, and we have to get to it. Why? And a lot of the people who are disillusioned are in fact the young voters who saw a lot in the Barbados Labour Party. And I think if you look at the last election, although the data does not, from the Electoral and Boundaries Commission, does not quite capture that for us, but certainly as you went across Barbados and you look at the people who are coming out in the polls, you saw a lot of young people. I do not think we saw that this time. And so there is certainly a disconnect between young people and both of the political parties. But the Democratic Labour Party, I think, suffered from that a little more than the Barbados. And I'm speculating. One of the things we have to do right now is speculate, because we haven't gotten our hands yet on a lot of the data that will come out of the elections. So what I'm saying is that we need to get to the root of that. We need to understand the disillusionment of the primarily the young voters who decided that they were going to stay home because they did not view the Democratic Labour Party as a political alternative to the Barbados Labour Party. And therefore, the result was this astonishing thing that we witnessed last night. Astonishing in terms of what are the implications for the Democratic Labour Party. Because I think if nothing else, this says is that this defeat of the Democratic Labour Party needs to say to them that what y'all failed to do, although I recognize they were in the rebuilding process, but what they failed to do after that massive defeat in 2018, they need to do it. All political parties that have suffered the kind of defeat, and sometimes not even that kind of extensive defeat, have gone back and they have in fact done a lot of introspection, and they have come out with strategies, methods, including the programs they are going to pursue. And we did not see that, unfortunately, in the way that we should have seen from the Democratic Labour Party.
Okay, thank you. Let's go to our next comment. We were going to do 3, but I think we can only squeeze in 1 more. I helped a relative yesterday who, after waiting about 40 minutes in line, was told she was at the wrong place. She hasn't been to the polls in a while and didn't realize her polling place had changed, and she never got the slip in the mail. These types of situations just highlight our inefficiencies. I did hear some other stories. One person said that she was not allowed, not that she wasn't allowed to vote, she was asked to remove some silver bangles that she was wearing, and when she refused, she wasn't allowed to vote. So Devron, does the EBC really need to look at some of these issues? I heard a lot of Barbadians talking about that they'd moved and that they'd written and said they'd moved, but they were still receiving slips that told them that they're voting in the old place rather than the new place. So is the EBC one of these agencies that also needs to do some introspection?
Yes, certainly. I would have to agree with you. The EBC needs to do some introspection in many forms of fashion. One of the key things that has to be looked at is uh, the legal principles that they have, the ROPA, for instance, that they utilize to carry out their administrative tasks. You also have to look at things such as the funding, whether or not they have sufficient funding and staffing and training in order to really carry out the elections in a very efficient manner. Because we've seen in 2018 and now in 2022 how long it took for elections to be called, in essence, or to get results in. And given the fact you had such a low turnout, you would have expected an earlier count. So there's some several inefficiencies that I think need to be addressed. The EBC certainly needs to be brought into the 21st century as it relates to legislation, as it relates to its administration. For instance, we know that the COVID persons were unable to vote, and those things could be certainly addressed and brought into the future regarding the EBC. mailing ballots, absentee ballots, digitization of ballots. So there's several things that we need to look at regarding the EBC, regarding the minor things like wearing bangles, not being able to vote versus not getting circulars. That is a managerial issue, and that is really a training issue that can be addressed. But there are larger and more pertinent matters that have to be addressed with the EBC.
Okay, thank you for that, Dr. Bell. Your final comments?
My final comments or my comments?
Just your comments. Sorry, on this particular issue of the EBC and whether they too need to do some introspection
Yeah,
and
well,
start to modernize the
I
organization.
agree with the points about innovation and so on, I agree with that. But a vote is a fundamental right in a democracy. And I would say that it is also a human right in terms of the evolution of a society's civilization. So that there's a saying, no one can free you, but your no hands can free you, but your own. And there's another saying, let the buyer beware. So that people also have to take responsibility for checking out all these things beforehand. If you have silver bangles on your hand, check out whether those are going to cause you a problem to lose your vote. Well, take off the damn bangles, and then or don't wear them. Wear brass or something, But anyhow, I think those kind of things people must not depend on somebody else to look after them or somebody else to tell them the rules and so on and so forth. Check the rules out. You should think that the vote is so important that you will check out these things. So no hands can free you but your own.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Bell. We're going to take a break, but we come back, final segment. We go round robin and find out what everyone is thinking about this comments by Mia Motley that this is her last term.
X-Trail is brought to you in part by Amaze. Come in and be amazed. We've got what you need. And Insure. Your life, your health, your insure.
In the final segment of the program, we're going to look at the heir apparent to the Barbados Labour Party. We've heard the Prime Minister Mia Motley state on more than one occasion that this could be her last term. She says that by 2027, she would have been in political life nearly 32, heading into 40 years, and that she has put the people first and she's done what she came to do. So who is she grooming? And not only that, is she really done? We're going to find that out. Let me start with you, Professor Barbados.
Can I answer one part of the question, please? Who is she grooming? Can I answer that part of the question, whether or not Mia Motley is really going to retire from active politics, or at least parliamentary politics? It's a conversation I've had before, going back to some maybe 15 years or so, or maybe a little less. And she has been very consistent as this in relation to her conversations with me, that she believes in term limits, and that ideally what she would like to do is serve 2 terms. So what she's saying now is entirely consistent with that. I would just want to say that as to whether or not it will actually take place, I will wait and see. If that, I'm not doubting her, but I'm still going to wait and see. The reason for that is that she's at the top of her game at this moment. She's not that old either. She's doing well. She's one of the most popular political leaders in Barbados ever. I think she's the most respected, certainly internationally and regionally. And I'm not sure whether or not I am supportive of that, that retirement from active politics at an age before she even reaches age 60. So that's one of my concerns. I would say, however, that when we look at the Caribbean, we do see a movement in terms of the English-speaking Caribbean, where prime ministers have in fact decided, some prime ministers have in fact decided that they are going to serve a certain set of, of terms. So that when we look at Belize, certainly in terms of the constitutional reform process, they had in fact limited a sitting prime minister to only 3 years, 3 terms, so that what Barbados is going to do, therefore, is entirely consistent with that. Now, I would say, therefore, that leaves us a lot of hope in relation to where possibly we can go in relation to constitutional reform. And just very quickly, in relation to the Barbados Labour Party, I think the Barbados Labour Party has quite a few a number of people in the party who have shown that they have leadership abilities and they are quite young. It would appear to me that in terms of what we have seen over the last 3.5 years, that Mia Motley has deliberately decided to elevate one, I'm not calling any names, but to elevate one member of the parliament over the others in relation to the a possible successor to her. Of course, I know the individual may, in fact, have a number of challenges because there are people within the political party, I suspect, who are also desirous of leading the political party. So I am not, I mean, I heard a concern last night, for instance, about what may happen when Mia Motley leaves. I think the Barbados Labour Party is in a very strong place. It is not the Democratic Labour Party. It is not struggling for successors to, as far as I'm concerned, to Mia Motley. And so therefore it is relatively safe in the if Mia Motley actually decides to in fact withdraw from active politics in Barbados.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Tennyson Joseph. Your thoughts? Is Mia Motley really going to quit after 2 terms? I'll be honest. I fully expect that she's going to move off the local stage and move to the either regional or international stage. And it would not surprise me if one morning I wake up and she's the Secretary General of the UN.
Well, the fact that she said it means that she's active. I think Professor Barbados has given us a sense of her own long-term thinking about it. But the fact that she's articulated it that way, I think the mouth is articulating what the heart has always felt. But the question I think that Professor Barbados was referring to is what the actual organic politics might portend. So you might say it now and feel it genuinely, but then later on, 5 years, 6 years down the road, then the circumstances might mean you might not have to, or you might not be compelled to. I also think I want to make the point larger point about the broad transformation vision that Dr. Bell was alluding to earlier. I agree with him. We're not talking about 100 days. The victory in 2018 and the victory last night meant that you're looking at roughly a 15 to 20-year cycle. Normally you have those 10-year cycles, but you have a 15 to 20-year cycle now, which means that Mia Motley's hand is much freer to craft the kind of changes that she wants. So I do think that we should take it, yes, as a serious and heartfelt, truthful position. But I want to suggest we look at it organically, what the politics might portend in a few years. And when we get to that point, we can make a concrete, substantive decision on it, or we know more clearly what the situation is. Insofar as the question of succession is concerned, I think we can watch the cabinet selection. Again, I go back to my point about a 10 to 15-year cycle. So you're looking at a context where the kind of cabinet she selects, the young people she brings into cabinet positions, how they look at it within the broader scheme of things of the government. Because remember, a cabinet is not just an administrative mechanism, but a political mechanism. And that might give us a clue as to what the future would look like. But of course, it will all boil down to the actual organic politics itself. The leader will emerge, the genuine leader will emerge. Very often, those that are handpicked and selected often suffer loss. But there are those who are able to play the politics right, and your national image, your organic will come through. And all of those factors put in the mix will determine who the next leader or the future leader might be.
Devron, are we going to see a shakeup? Are we going to see a change in ministries? And as Tennyson says, we're going to see different people come to the fore, maybe younger people come to the fore?
I believe so because I think Mayor Motley has actively tried to bring some fresh blood into the Barbados Labour Party. I think she's one of the few prime ministers that really understands succession. Well, I mean, her predecessor as well, or Renata, understood succession as well too. So I think that you would definitely see some newer blood within the cabinet. One of the major roles, for instance, that we are going to be missing is the Minister of Health. Now that Jeffrey Boss is no longer with us, or well, has exit politics, I should say. So we will see what type of mindset she has regarding that ministry. But as it relates to the cabinet, I think
Culture,
we will see
because
some new
John
blood
King
because
has exited as well.
well,
And you know,
exactly
culture is
precisely.
one
So
of her
culture.
babies.
Precisely. Culture as well. So health and culture, we will see who will take the mantles regarding that aspect. And I'm also curious about the Senate, where she will bring persons as well, and who we will see in the Senate as well for the Barbados Labour Party. So I definitely think there's going to be a shakeup. I'm not sure if it will be a major shakeup. the reality is that it's a new mandate, they're new persons, and they may very well bring new skill sets that may have been missing or may supplement skill sets within the party and within the cabinet and within the government. And we will definitely see if they're put to task and whether they're given any responsibilities to help them grow within the party. Because we have seen and heard the cry that Motley in essence overshadows a lot, but we will see whether or not she's going to give the younger candidates and the ones that just won their seats, for instance, some room to shine.
Dr. Bell, are we going to see a much smaller cabinet? When she won in 2018, the size of her cabinet was always a talking point. Then we saw in April last year where she downsized a little bit. Can she come back with that size cabinet again?
Yes, she can, but the question is with
Should she?
If the original problem potentially is still there. I think that one of the things that she faced with getting a 30-love victory was to control her backbench and the potential for people to become a bit of a political nuisance, and on the basis of putting so many people into the cabinet, you kind of close off potential um, rebellion and that type of thing in the backbench. So that I don't think that that is so much there now because she has shown her preparedness to intervene and to deal with situations that might be very hurtful to herself. For instance, the way that she dealt with, I know this is not in the lower house, but look at the way she dealt with her friend, Miss Mo. That when she wants to move somebody out of the cabinet, she will move them. Or look at George Penn, who could have been a big challenge to her, and so on. So people now know that she will be prepared to make those decisions if called upon to do so. And therefore, that might keep them in place in a way that they might have not been prepared to do back in 2018 when she was a new prime minister. So I think that she's likely to go for a smaller cabinet because of all of the problems that were the criticisms that were aimed at her on having a large cabinet. But on the other hand, the tasks that she set herself now are actually greater than the tasks then, although the tasks then were emergency tasks. And the mission critical took care of a lot of that, coming out of the hole that the DLP had dug. So in that sense, she might go for a smaller cabinet and do some reorganization in the in the ministries. I think that the any new leader will emerge, as Tennyson said. Uh, the Although I can see that she's nurturing a number of people, and I think that is the best thing to do too. You might have somebody who is sticking ahead a bit, but you nurture a number of people, and one of them is going to be able to navigate properly and get through to going to full leadership. On the other hand, Miss Motley told me about 20 years ago, yeah, about 20 years or more ago, but that she was going to just be in politics for another 10 years. So I you can work out 20, where that would have meant that she shouldn't be around now at all. But there's another aspect of the thing as well that the one of the ways of seeing who is going to make a move, but she doesn't have that problem. It would more be if the DLP was in office, is to say that you are withdrawing, and when you withdraw, there are certain people that will step forward, because as she did when Mr. Arthur made the mistake of saying that he was ready to go home, and she is not a lieutenant, she is a number one. So when she did that, people said privately that Miss Motley attempted to carry out a coup d'état against him, and that was part of the beginning of the tension between herself and Mr. Arthur.
Mr.
So
Arthur.
sometimes it is not wise to go and say these things about you ready to leave. Everybody know you have to leave because you're human, so you're gonna have to leave anyhow. And we don't know what is the state of her health or anything. We don't. We wish her the best. But and she did make explicit mention of that a lot of the prime ministers, have suffered in office. So that it's a very hard job. You see them turning gray, not only here but all around the world, where political leaders turn gray very quickly. Wants to be in office at a certain time. So I think we know, and she works 24. She works at 24 hours. So a lot will be coming out of her. She probably is already tired, but she has a lot of energy. That is another characteristic of leaders, that they have tremendous energy. And I've seen that in dealing with a number of them. that the energy is extraordinary, is more than the normal human being. And she has been demonstrating that to the amazement of some of her cabinet and some of the supporters of the Barbados Labour Party. So that I think those things would be in my mind in relation to the kind of issue that you raised. And I will wait to see whether she really goes. And I know that there is going to be a call for her to stay. And we will see what happens then in the longer term. There's a
Okay,
lot of
John.
potential from other younger politicians there as well. So I think I mentioned that point already.
Well, gentlemen, unfortunately, we're out of time. We haven't even got time for a final thought. So I want to thank you for appearing on the program. A special thanks to Professor Cynthia Barbados, who unfortunately had to leave us. Dr. Tennyson Joseph, Devron Bruce, thank you so much for being on X-Trail. I hope that it does not take another election for us to come together again and chat. Thank you, gentlemen. You've been watching Extra. We want to thank you for joining us throughout this suite of programs over the election period. We hope you stay safe and stay well. I'm Joel Ford. Bye-bye.
X-Trail is brought to you in part by Amaze. Come in and be amazed. We've got what you need. And Insure. Your life, your health, your insure.